With us for this segment is my good friend Cliff Schecter. Cliff is an author, pundit, and public relations strategist. Pete, can we do something? I'm getting a little feedback in my ear. I'm just talking to the producers here. Okay. Cliff's first book is The Real McCain, Why Conservatives Don't Trust Him and Why Independents Shouldn't. He was an on-air political analyst for a lot of groups, including Al Jazeera. With his analysis, it says here, reaching countries spanning the globe, and now he's a regular panelist on a show in Columbus, Ohio. Did I get that right, Cliff?
Mostly. The Columbus, Ohio was a little bit in the past, but everything else is fantastic.
Okay, great. And there's a lot more here, too, but I just don't have time to cover it because we have a subject to get to. Hey, man, thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on, man.
You bet. And I wish we were talking about a better topic. But unfortunately, you and I have talked about gun control before. We talked privately. We talked on the air. We're plagued by these shootings, and unfortunately, we've had another one this week at Fort Hood. What's the latest? Just bring us up to date on what we know so far, if you would.
Yeah, well, what we know is that 4 people were killed, including the shooter himself, Ivan Lopez. He was 34 years old. We know that he killed himself. There were 16 additional people who were injured, a number of them, I think almost half of them, in critical condition. We know that he was in Iraq for 4 months in 2011. He suffered traumatic brain injury, even though he was not in combat, so I don't think we have details on how that occurred, and that he'd suffered from anxiety, depression, and a variety of other psychological problems, and he had been seeing somebody about that. But otherwise, we don't know, and we know, I should say we do know something else. We know, sadly and tragically, he went and bought his gun in the same place, a store called Guns Galore, which almost says everything, doesn't it? That Nidal Hassan, the Fort Hood shooter who killed 13 people in 2009, got his gun from.
And this was something I wanted to talk to you a little bit about because, I don't think enough people are aware, for example, that Nidal Hassan, who was the Fort Hood shooter several years ago, and now Ivan Lopez, people think shooting at a military base, well, those guys all have guns, and the military actually has pretty strict control over how guns are handled and so on. These guys can just go out, regardless of what they're being treated for or anything else. Like any other American, they can go in and they can go out and buy a gun. Guns galore. It's horrifying. I didn't know that. And then because they can't search everybody coming in and out of the base, they come back in and they perform these horrific acts of violence. Isn't that an important part of this story?
Well, it's a huge part of it. I mean, look, the people that have the guns there, as you point out, the military police. This morning, on MSNBC, somehow the fraudulent John Lott, who's one of these gun researchers who's been bought by right-wing think tanks, went on and he tried to say that everybody on a base should have guns, and he was smacked down by a Medal of Honor winner, Colonel Jacobs, who pointed out that would be chaos and that would have led to fratricide. This is a guy who's commanded troops who may just know a little bit better than a guy, John Lott, who made up a fake internet persona for himself to compliment himself online. But going, taking it further than that, again, our response is what it always is, which is the people who have an interest in protecting the gun culture, who profit from it, who keep political office because of it, claim, we've got to figure out what happened, which is just insulting at this point. We don't need to figure out what happened. We know what happened. Another person who had psychological issues, the same thing happened at Virginia Tech, the same thing happened in Aurora, Colorado, the same thing happened in Tucson. In all of these cases, the Navy Yard shooter in Washington, D.C., there was clear evidence of somebody who had a psychological disorder, but we have such a loose-knit system right now where states are not even required to share all the records they have. A lot of the record keeping is not even done because you only get records on people if they're involuntarily committed. If they're voluntarily committed, you don't. These records are not put into the system. There's so many shortcomings. It's literally like we're doing it to ourselves on purpose. Every other country that has tried to deal with this, Western country, most recently Australia, that had seen a mass shooting every year leading up to their Port Arthur massacre, which was almost like their version of Newtown in 1996, where somebody got their hands on a number of assault weapons and killed about 40 people there. They instituted real reforms after that. They went and they said, you know what, there's going to be a 1 month waiting period, and you're going to have to go through psychological testing, and you're going to have a serious background check. We're banning assault weapons. Where they did what countries do when they care about this kind of thing, and in the end, they've not had one mass shooting since then, and their homicides have gone down something like 70%. We know how to stop this. We've seen other countries. In Australia had a history of gun ownership the same as this country, a frontier history, so that excuse can't be used. We're choosing not to. We're saying that this is the price we pay so that everybody out there can get every toy they want whenever they want.
Cliff, are you with us?
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. RJ? Did I lose you?
I think you did. One of us lost the other. I don't know how. But, you were saying that we know how to cure this problem, that Australia addressed this problem. And by the way, in my research, and this is going back now a year, but in my research on the topic, I found only one other country that had an ideological notion that gun ownership was a form of freedom, which was Yemen, and Yemen was reevaluating it.
That's right, and they've still had about half the rate of gun ownership we have in this country, which is still about 40-50% above what most other Western countries have. I mean, we're outlandish in this. I don't know where I cut off when I was talking to you before, but the point I was making, which is Australia went literally from one a year to none. They'd had, of these kinds of killings, these mass shootings. They've had none since they passed their reforms in '96. And their homicide and suicide rate, because of how easily we make it for people to get guns here, who leave them around for kids to shoot each other with no liability for it, their homicide rate and their suicide rate both plummeted by about 60-70%. We know how to solve this. We're choosing to let people who want to have every toy they want, every moment they want, to not solve it.
So why aren't we able to pass? Everybody thought, not everybody, because some of us are more hard-nosed than others, but most Americans, I think, thought after the Newtown tragedy that we would pass some form of gun control legislation in this country. Why can't we do it?
Well, a lot of the answer was in what happened this week to further erode our democracy in the McCutcheon case, which is the vast amount of money that's allowed in politics that distorts incentives and basically corrupts and buys off politicians. That's a big part of it. Another part of it is the obstructionism we've got going on in Washington, because one needs to remember we had 55 votes to pass some sane gun safety legislation, and in a body that's supposed to be ruled by democracy, that was still not enough. So, I mean, it's not to say that nothing, we had 55 votes there. A number of states, about 8 or 9, maybe I think more than that, have passed intelligent gun safety regulations since that time. Other states are working on it. The state of Washington is going to have background checks on the ballot this year. A number of states are doing the right thing, but then we've still got this system of ours that allows filibusters, that allows unlimited money, that allows a senator in Wyoming to have the same amount of power who represents 500,000 people as a senator from California who represents 38 million people.
We got 30 seconds. I'm going to cut you off there and say, is there someplace people can go to learn more and take some action on this?
I work with a group. I tell them to go to gunvictimsaction.org, the National Gun Victims Action Council, and we're doing a lot of great work, I would say, on trying to use economic measures, boycotts, to start changing our culture around guns. It's a place to start.
Well, that's a great place to start. We're going to stay on this story. Tragically, I used to say after Newtown, I'm not anti-guns, I'm pro-kindergartner. We can say the same thing. If you support the troops, it's another reason to go to the websites you just mentioned and fight for rational gun legislation. Cliff Schecter, thanks so much for being with us.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on, RJ.
You bet. We'll be right after this on the Zero Hour.